How's it going, folks? Welcome to another edition of the Reviewing Network Talks About, and we're continuing my list of my top 30 favorite films of all time. We've already covered Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Eyes Wide Shut, Wall-E, and A Boy Named Charlie Brown as we get to number 26 on my list. And this is going to be a very interesting episode because the movie I'm about to talk about, I actually already did a video on. Specifically a preview episode of the Reviewing Network Talks About, that was a couple months ago. And that movie is Twice Upon a Time. I would say go check the video out there if you haven't seen it already. But if you haven't found that video on there, or if you just want to don't bother to even change over to that, I'm going to take that video that I have over there and put it into this particular episode. So if you want to watch this one, or you want to watch the other video, by all means do one or the other. But for those of you who have not seen that video, here are my thoughts on Twice Upon a Time and why it's my 26th favorite film of all time. Never heard of it? So there might be a good reason why you may never have heard of it. It's a movie that for the longest time was incredibly hard to find. It's usually often forgotten because of that, but there is a way you can watch it now, and I'll delve into that as we go along here, and I'll talk about why it was hard to find a copy of it later on, but let's delve into the story. This is the story of Twice Upon a Time. So once upon a time, there were some people called the Rushers of Din. Each night as they slept, sweet dreams were delivered to them from sunny Frivolity, while nightmares came to them from the mysterious Muckworks. But the malevolent master of the Muck, synonymous Botch, was not content. He wanted the Rushers to have non-stop nightmares. To do that, he would need to gain the control of the cosmic clock, and to accomplish this, he kidnaps the deliveries of the dreams, Greensleeves and the figment of imagination, and then tricks Ralph, the all-purpose animal, played by Lorenzo Music, and you could probably tell what exactly he looks like here, that a character that he would become synonymous with later on down the road. I'm, of course, talking about Heathcliff. I mean, who else would I be talking about here? Okay, it's Garfield. I don't even know why I did that, but anyway, yeah, that's Lorenzo Music doing the voice of Ralph the All-Purpose Animal, and he really does look like Garfield there. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not, but maybe it wasn't, because the first Garfield special was only about less than a year old when this came out, so I don't know, but anyway, back to the story here. So Ralph and his pal Mumford are tricked into stealing the mainspring from the cosmic clock, and realizing they've been tricked, they try to get the spring back and prevent Botch from unveiling his nightmare bombs. Along the way, they get help from the fairy godmother, Greensleeve's niece Flora Fauna, the junior varsity superhero Rod Rescueman, and Botch's own head nightmare rider Scuzzbopper. I've seen this movie so many times that I can't even remember the names here, but so when you look at this movie, and if you remember it, it's a lot to take in, but overall, it is a very solid and very creative movie. This is a film that is put together using the process called Lubitsch animation, which is essentially prefabricated cut-out plastic pieces used in live-action stills and in live-action scenes, similar to what's used in stop-motion animation and a little bit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But the biggest thing about this movie, the biggest feature about the movie, is who was the executive producer on this film, and that was George Lucas. And that's definitely noteworthy when you see that one of the characters in the movie, named Eeyore the Video Gorilla, uses clips from Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark in its monitor. And that kind of is part of the reason why the movie had a hard time actually getting a physical release when it later on down the road. But the film itself had a really rough history, mostly in the releasing process. The company that released this movie was the Ladd Company. Now, the Ladd Company is a company you may be very familiar with because they were under Warner Brothers. Alan Ladd Jr. was the head man behind it. They founded this when they were executives at 20th Century Fox, and then they left to create their own company. Before this, they had done stuff like Divine Madness. They were behind the Oscar-winning Best Picture Chariots of Fire. They did Outland, Body Heat, Looker, Tragedy of a Ridiculous Man, the classic Blade Runner, Night Shift. They were a company that, for most of the early 80s, were a prolific company, mostly for Warner Brothers. They tried to relaunch it back in the 90s, but it didn't last very long, and the last movie they actually produced together as a studio was actually Gone Baby Gone, which came out in 2007, and by that point they were just sporadically releasing movies every couple of years instead of just every couple of months like they did in the early 80s. But at the time they were going through a lot of financial troubles and had a choice of either putting Twice Upon a Time into limited release or a worldwide release, and faced a similar decision with The Right Stuff, which of course later on went on to be nominated for several Oscars that year. Since Twice Upon a Time was animated, it was decided to put the film in limited release, and subsequently it failed at the box office, and a similar thing happened to The Right Stuff, causing the Ladd company to shut down after that. So, and that's enough of a problem already. But then when the film made it to television, more problems began to rise, this time with the directors and the alternate cuts of the film. You have one version where Greensleeves is not kidnapped by Botch's vultures. Ralph and Mumford stop by a bar before seeing the fairy godmother and meet Greensleeves. He tells the boys to get the spring after they tell him that they released it. Later, the spring escapes the vultures and meets Greenie, who is then asked to put the spring back in the cosmic clock. And at this point, the vultures sweep in, kidnap the spring and Greensleeves. And there's actually two different versions of the movie that are out there. One is the regular PG-rated version that came out in theaters, and there's another version with a lot of adult language. From the outset, the director John Cordy didn't want to use the dialogue of the original script, but Marshall Efron thought his lines were perfect and played up the raunchier aspects of his character. Some lines were actually selected by Bill Couturier, who also was one of the main people behind the film, the writer and producer. And Cordy was unaware of this until opening night and was very angry about how Marshall Efron's lines were delivered from that script. And so years later, when Twice Upon a Time was shown on HBO, the version that HBO received and showed was the version that Couturier liked, and when Cordy found that out, he immediately contacted HBO, threatened legal action if the version was ever aired again. So there were only 3 showings of this specific version, and HBO actually suspended broadcast of the film until supplied with a new cut from Cordy. And so the new cut filled out the remaining showings of Twice scheduled that month, prompting complaints of censored movies being shown on HBO, and after the complaints, HBO chose to never air the film again on their services. And then 2 months later, Showtime and over-the-air paid TV service Spectrum acquired rights to show the film, but only the John Cordy-approved version. And this version has the complete scene of Out on My Own, as well as the uncut final reel of the film, which is absent from the later home video version. That home video version came out in 1991. It was finally released to video on Laserdisc. However, the Laserdisc was only pan and scan and one side CAV and no supplements. Apparently, John Cordy won the battle, and as the version released is very cleaned up and a bit shorter in certain scenes. The basic story is there, but with original scenes and dialogue altered. The version is incomplete in its final presentation, and the film did actually air on TV later down the line in 1997 and 1998. Disney Channel aired it, and then Cartoon Network aired it on when they had started airing movies on there. And since then, the movie has never aired on television again. And as of recently, though, it did come out. It did finally make it onto DVD after so many years. It started off with a showing on Turner Classic Movies that same year in February of 2015, and it was part of their Turner Classic Movies Underground block, and then it aired again in May of 2019. But by the fall of 2015, the movie finally got a proper DVD release, which includes both cuts of the movie, an audio commentary with John Cordy, as well as selected crew members, including Henry Selick, who of course you know from his work with Tim Burton, as well as the stuff he did with Leica Animation, and the original theatrical trailer and TV spots. So both versions are available on this particular DVD set, so I highly recommend definitely checking that out. But for a long time, the movie had never been released on DVD, mostly because of licensing restrictions, including, unlicensed clips revolving around the Video Gorilla, including Happy Days, The Muppets, even Looney Tunes, even though this is a Warner Brothers release. And again, Star Wars and Indiana Jones, too, because they were from Fox and Paramount. Of course, this was before Disney eventually got their hands on them, so Warner Brothers was lucky to get that out there when they did. And so yeah, there was a point where you really couldn't find a release for this movie, and you had to go online to really find them, and you had to pay a lot of money to get them too on Amazon and eBay. But like I said, they re-released the movie on DVD in 2015, and you can definitely go check it out now, and I highly recommend you do check it out here. But let's get back to the movie itself here. Let's talk about what I love about this movie and why it's one of my favorites of all time. The entire film is very creative in terms of its characters, its story, and its settings. It takes a lot of the creative approaches on all of its levels, and for the most part, every single bit of them work really well here. You do really like these characters, the main heroes, Ralph and Mumford. They're great, memorable characters. Ralph can change into different forms of animals as well as shapes, kind of like Jake from Adventure Time, which I wouldn't be surprised if Pendleton Ward, I almost forgot who the creator of Adventure Time was. Wouldn't be surprised if he got the inspiration for this film, for Jake the dog. I mean, it feels like he took a lot of inspiration from that. And Mumford is kind of like Gromit from Wallace and Gromit, in that he doesn't speak, but his expressions and characteristics lead to some of the funnier films in the moment. I love the villain in this movie, Synonymous Botch. He's devilishly enjoyable. Like, he has a really diabolical plan, but at the same time, he's so giddy and over the top about doing it. He's becoming hilarious as the movie goes on. His attempts to stop anyone in his way, particularly at the end. I love this part where, Ralph and Mumford are trying to get past these bombs that he keeps throwing that Bosch keeps throwing at them. He flat out does whatever it takes to stop the heroes from foiling his plans, but throwing all the bombs at them. There's a point where he literally tells the heroes, "Are you boys all right? Okay, hold still this time." And he starts using the weapons again, and just the way that scene is played out is friggin' hilarious. I mean, it's really well done. And speaking of well done, let's talk about the real highlight of this movie. And when you actually see the nightmare bombs that Synonymous Bosch is planning to use on everybody in action, I mean, just the setup for this scene alone is amazing. Ralph and Mumford, they go in there, they get the piece for the cosmic clock, and the spring actually causes time to freeze. So everybody in this town, the town of Din, everybody freezes, and like everything is like in stills and all that. They chase the spring throughout the building, and then they get to a nightmare bomb, and one of the bombs goes off, and you see this black smoke that starts coming out of the thing as you see all the still images, and all of a sudden you see this black cloud coming through here, and you just know something terrible is about to happen. So the bomb goes off in the office building, and you see all this crazy stuff happening where all the office supplies come to life and start going after the heroes. And I mean, they did a great job of making these things look downright terrifying. Like, every single thing in this building is trying to kill them. And that's the point when you realize this is serious business, because these bombs are serious business. I mean, the animation in the sequence alone is amazing. It's some of the best animation I've seen in a long, long time. And it helps to have a great score by Ken Melville and Don Atkinson, who do the score for this. Like, they do a great job of creating the tension, creating the build-up for this scene, and just paying off big time here. Like, you see how important this is. And I'm always interested to see the credits and look at future directors in their early jobs on these movies from the 80s and 90s. And like I said before, not only do you see Henry Selick as one of the sequence directors, but the special photographic effects on this film were done by David Fincher. That David Fincher, the same David Fincher who directed The Social Network, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Seven, all these great movies. It's important to remember that Fincher was working at Lucasfilm at the time and had already worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as working on Return of the Jedi, so it's an interesting piece of film history to look back and see those names on there. More I can say about this movie, the more I absolutely love about it. Twice Upon a Time is just a solidly fun animated movie with a creative story, memorable characters, and just a lot of creative energy in the terms of the animation, the way it's put together. It's an amazing movie that sadly does not get the proper respect it deserves. I feel like this is a film that deserves a lot more attention than it gets, but because of how badly they botched the release of the film, and how it had a troubled history of actually getting a proper release on DVD and as it's well being seen on TV, it's largely been forgotten. But please check this movie out. It's a movie you can buy it online on YouTube. You can get physical copies of it on Amazon on DVD. Please seek this movie out. It is an interesting piece of not just animation history, but film history as well. It's a movie that time is forgotten on this, but it's a forgotten movie that's well worth the time. I highly recommend checking this movie out. And I know I'm just kind of repeating something that I already put out already, but we're going to be doing this for a couple of other movies that I've already talked about in length. Specifically, my number one favorite film is one we'll definitely be delving into another retread of. I have to figure out what I have to do about that one, but Twice Upon a Time, my 26th favorite film of all time. Check back here next week for number 25, and check out some of the other videos I've done showing off the other movies on my list. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. So until then, take care.